Whether you're carrying clothes and a laptop, groceries, or maybe camping gear, there are lots of ways to carry your stuff on a bike. And figuring out the best one for you isn't necessarily straightforward. Between bar bags, frame bags, saddle bags, rack and panniers, and backpacks, it can be hard to decide what the best choice is for you. In today's video, we'll compare a backpack to a rack and panniers in the context of a bike commute. But no matter what you're doing, you should be able to apply the same concepts to figure out which one is best for you. For the past month, I've been commuting 60 miles round trip to and from my new job. I've got to carry with me clothes, shower stuff, a laptop, and some other things. I've been going back and forth between using a backpack and a rack and panniers. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the pros and cons of each and which situations I'd use a backpack versus which ones I use a rack and panniers. I've got a lot of stuff to carry in today. Not only am I going to work, but immediately after work, I've got to head to soccer practice for my kids. And that increased need for cargo capacity is the primary reason why I'm using a rack and panniers right now. Probably the biggest pro in the rack and pannier column is exactly that, cargo carrying capacity. I've got 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, a couple belts, socks and underwear, a towel because my office occasionally doesn't have them, clothes for soccer, my computer, a lock, food, sunscreen, and some other stuff. Now I don't need everything that I'm carrying, but for the purposes of the video, I wanted to make it as extreme as it reasonably could be. And everything that I have fits well and possibly comfortably, we'll get to that in a minute, in those bags. There's no way I fit all that stuff in a backpack. So if carrying capacity is your #1 concern, the rack and panniers is, in my opinion, the clear winner. There's some flexibility there. You've got different racks and bags that come in different sizes, and you can pick what's best for you and your cargo carrying needs. The next major difference between a backpack and a rack and panniers is comfort. But which one is more comfortable for you may not be as straightforward as it seems. Now it probably sounds obvious that with a backpack, all the weight is on your body. And with a rack and panniers, the weight's on the bike. But all of that weight, particularly as I have it right on top of the back wheel, changes how your bike handles pretty dramatically. I didn't optimize for weight when picking my bags and rack. And that was by design. I wanted to make sure I had bags that were large enough and durable enough to meet my needs. And I didn't really care about weight all that much. As a consequence though, when I run the rack and panniers, this bike gets really heavy and that weight is not even close to being evenly distributed. So the difference in handling is radical, particularly when I'm at speed and trying to corner. Oh, and stopping. Getting out of the saddle can feel really awkward too, because as you're up on the pedals, moving the bike back and forth, that's a whole lot more weight than you're used to swinging around. Now, when talking about weight, of course, if you carry more stuff, you're going to be carrying more weight. But I think it's important to note that even empty, my rack and panniers is significantly heavier than my backpack. In fact, and I'll test this, I would speculate that my rack and panniers empty is heavier than my backpack with a laptop instead of clothes. In fact, the weight on my back wheel is so significant that I opted to take off my lighter, faster, racy wheels with carbon spokes and replace them with these gravel-specific wheels that are tougher, more durable, and have metal spokes. They've also got much more tire volume. My other wheels I'm running 30s, and on these I've got 38s. That handling difference is really significant. In fact, you can kind of see it a bit in this ride. Let's go back to this moment when I was trying to unzip my gilet. You can see here that I don't take my hands off the bar. Under normal circumstances, I've got no problem sitting up, taking both hands off, unzipping the gilet, and putting it in my back pocket. There's no way I'm doing that with this setup. In addition to all the weight being on your body with a backpack, the other major potential comfort issue is the interplay between the backpack and your helmet. Particularly when descending and in the drops, I've found that some backpack and helmet combinations will press against each other right at the back of your head, making it really uncomfortable. But if you're on a flat bar bike, more upright, don't use your drops much, or there's no descending on your route, that might be a non-issue. I find it both funny and super encouraging that even though my bike weighs 1,000,000 pounds and is not at all aero, I'm going uphill faster than the traffic. No matter what method you use to carry your gear, adding weight to your bike will cause some important changes to how it behaves that we need to consider. But since I don't really want to explain physics while riding a bike, and I'm pretty close to work, now seems like a pretty good time to visit the Nerd Zone. Nerd Zone! Welcome to the Nerd Zone, where we talk about relevant science concepts in a way that is fun, easy to understand, and shot at a different camera angle. Today we're talking about F equals ma. F is force, or how hard you have to push on the pedals, M is your mass, or your weight, and A is acceleration, that is, how quickly you want to speed up or slow down. In this equation, force is directly proportional to both mass and acceleration. But because mass and acceleration are on the same side of the equal sign and both in the numerator, they're inversely proportional to each other. So, if you want to increase your acceleration at the same mass, you have to increase your force. Or, if you want to maintain constant acceleration, but you increase your mass, you also have to increase your force. If you maintain steady force and decrease your mass, you'll increase your acceleration. But how is this related to a backpack versus rack and panniers? Well, in either case, you're adding weight to the system. And in the case of a rack and panniers, it's a lot more weight. Most people seem to intuitively understand that as things get heavier, it makes them harder to go uphill because you're fighting against gravity. But it's not so straightforward to realize that even on completely flat land, the weight matters. Not necessarily once you're up to speed, but getting up to speed and also slowing down take more work as you increase the mass. We should also talk about what work is in this case. So in our equation, F equals ma, F, as we've discussed, is force. Work is force times distance. Technically it's force times displacement, but let's not get into that. You can think of work as energy, which we measure in calories or kilojoules. There are certainly factors other than weight that affect how many kilojoules I put out on a bike commute. Air resistance is the big one, rolling resistance is another. But generally speaking, my position on the bike is the same if I'm riding the same bike, and the tires are the same if I'm riding the same bike. So the rolling resistance doesn't change much, and the wind resistance doesn't change much either, and yes, there's wind, but I do round trips, so it usually nets out to be the same. And I do about 10% less work, that is 10% fewer kilojoules, when I am using a backpack versus a rack and panniers. We could talk about another equation, momentum, P equals mv, or calories as a unit of energy, but those are different Nerd Zone segments. Let's get back outside. Let's contrast that with the backpack that I'm wearing this morning. It doesn't fit nearly as much as the rack and panniers, but it doesn't need to. I don't need to carry as much today. But it's also not as heavy as the rack and panniers, which is a really good thing because it's on my back. And while I don't love the extra weight on my body, it does have a hip belt and a sternum strap, which keep the weight off of my shoulders and evenly distributed across my back. And because it's on my body and not on the bike, it doesn't affect the handling of the bike nearly as much as the rack and panniers. For me, the biggest drawback of the backpack, other than the added weight on my body, is the fact that it renders my jersey pockets or vest pockets pretty much inaccessible, which means I have to get pretty creative in trying to figure out where I'm going to put food that I want to eat. Some backpacks solve this problem by having a spot on the chest or maybe on the hips to store food or gels, but this one doesn't. It also means that if you get warm and want to take off your vest, you pretty much have to stop because I'm not Houdini and I can't get the vest off under the backpack. Off we go. On the plus side for backpacks, they're basically a grab-and-go solution that don't require a lot of thought. You could just take your stuff, shove it in your backpack, throw it on your back, and get on the road. And they work with any bike. So if you don't like the way a rack looks on your bike, you don't want to figure out which racks are compatible with your bike, or can't be bothered with installing one, none of that matters with a backpack. On top of that, I feel like the backpack opens up more route options for me. The rack and panniers work out just fine on fire road and hard pack, but if I want to hit some single track on the way home, I'm not doing that with the rack and panniers. The bike just isn't nimble enough with that setup. And a backpack, on the other hand, is basically the same thing as wearing a hydration pack, which is perfectly normal to see on the trails. There's no perfect solution, at least not that I've found. And despite the pros and cons, they've both got a spot in my commute arsenal. That said, my go-to, my default, is the backpack. While the gravel bike is my commute bike of choice, it's not the one that I always want to ride. And if I'm using a backpack, I don't need to decide which bike I'm going to ride until it's time to put my shoes on. But your situation and needs might be different from mine. For example, if I had an e-bike, or if I had a bike that I only used for commuting and errands, I'd almost certainly go with the Rack and Panniers all the time. In both of those cases, I think the benefits of the Rack and Panniers outweigh what I see as the costs. But no matter which one you choose, you're going to be better off than those people over there.